Welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that went through all of the Friday the 13th movies 13 minutes at a time and is now covering fan films. I am Campfire Greg.
And I am audio engineer Brian.
Yeah, we're doing something a little bit different this time. We rented a cabin for the weekend in southern Indiana and have been watching a bunch of movies and workplace safety training videos and hilarious stuff like that. But since we were going to be together, and then the next movie, the next fan film that we had to talk about was a longer one, we thought, hey, why don't we watch the movie together here and then talk about it immediately afterwards? So this is a little bit more unscripted than we usually do. Brian was taking some notes while we were watching it, but we're just going to start talking about our impressions.
Yeah, if this is the first episode of the podcast that you're listening to, just realize that this is not how we normally do it. We are going to have to kind of wing it. It's been about half an hour since we watched the movie, so it's still pretty fresh in our minds, but we do tend to get a little bit more specific with our notes in terms of what we want to cover. So this will be a little bit more freeform, and then also want to point out that we are sitting by a campfire right now, and it's pretty windy, and it's pretty cold. And we're not exactly sure what the ambient noise is going to be. So hopefully once we listen back to this when we're done, it's not too crazy. But if you hear barking dogs or crackling wood or the occasional tornado going by, that's just because we are outside.
Or if I scream, oh, shit, the fire! And
Right.
So the fan film that we're going to be discussing is Roseblood, which is a fan-made sequel to Part 7, The New Blood. And, I mean, let's just get into it. I mean, what...
Yeah. So it came out November 29th of 2021. And the premise... Well, yeah, I mean, let's not even get into the premise yet, because we'll start talking about it. But it opens up with a present-day Tina Shepard in some sort of mental health facility, and she's having a conversation with like an off-screen doctor who, after a couple of minutes, we learn is Dr. Cruz, Bad News Cruz from The New Blood, and he's up to his old tricks of just trying to manipulate her and getting her to use her Tina powers for evil. Like, we never really knew what Dr. Cruz was trying to do in Part 7,
right.
But it's like he's trying to benefit from it somehow. And I mean, any fan of the films knows that Dr. Cruz is actually dead, so this is really just a vision that Tina is having. But
what's great is that it's Lark Park Lincoln and Terry Kaiser. They are reprising their roles.
Bernie Weekend himself.
It's been 30 years or whatever since Part 7 came out, so they're older and whatnot, but it's nice to see the familiar faces.
So that whole sequence with Lark Park Lincoln and Weekend at Bernie's doesn't last too long before we do a flashback to June 13th, 1989, which, if I'm not mistaken, is, and I think they even tell us this, is like 13 months after the events of The New Blood.
Right. Although I'm not positive if that lines up with the actual timeline of the Friday the 13th movies, because I think Part 5, based on the dates that we know from Parts 1, 2, and 3, like Part 5 takes place in 1989, even though the movie came out in 1985.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, there's a little bit of the sliding scale Crystal Lake timeline. But yes, this is 13 months after the events of Part 7.
And it's a young Tina, but it's a different actress. It's obviously not Lark Park Lincoln playing Tina this time, so it's just another actress, and she's undergoing the same kind of examinations that we saw in The New Blood and in the opening sequence, where doctors are just trying to get her to do her little party tricks. And in this case, it has something to do with like a magnet, and apparently this magnet is like super heavy and really strong, and it would be very difficult for someone to move with her mind, and so they're trying to get Tina to do it. And
but she seems to like this doctor more than her previous therapist, Dr. Cruz. This guy, it sounds like he was at some point in the previous 13 months he was having her move a matchbook and it caught fire and burned him. But she's very apologetic about it, and he has like little Star Wars oven mitts that he brought this time to be safe when he's having her do her tests. But yeah, we learned that this is actually setting up the Crystal Lake Research Facility, the CLRF, that is mentioned in Jason X. And the filmmaker can't decide whether it's the Camp Crystal Lake Research Facility or the Crystal Lake Research Facility.
Exactly, yeah, because like there's a monogram on her uniform that says CCLRF, which is to suggest that it's Camp Crystal Lake. But there's a scene where there's a sign, like I think you see like a close up of the monogram on her shirt that says Camp Crystal Lake, and then she opens a door and the sign on the door behind her says Crystal Lake Research Facility. So it's like they don't even know which is which. But Tina is able to achieve what the doctor was trying to get her to do, which basically was to move this magnet. And so he seems satisfied with that. And we learn that like this particular experiment they're calling Project Gravity. And there's a lot of like project references in this movie that you'll see. But so this is Project Gravity, and Tina's basically like asking the doctor, she's like, okay, now that I've done this trick, when can I go home? It's time for me to go home. And the doctor kind of, the way he reacts makes it clear that like, Tina, you're not going home anytime soon, if ever. So,
right. And she's wondering what happened to Nick. He claims he doesn't know. So, I mean, it's not necessarily sinister feeling, but it's definitely, there's some sort of agenda that she's not aware of. And we come to find out that this is actually a military installation. It's a U.S. Army military installation, which is described several times as being the most advanced center in the world. And it's a bunch of empty white rooms with a lot of like posters and stuff tacked to the walls.
Yeah.
It's the limitations of their budget and location ability. It's kind of funny whenever they talk about how advanced this facility is.
Well, and every poster is carefully punching you in the face with what time frame this is happening.
Right.
Lots of very specific, movie posters that were out at that time, and references to, Nintendo and how Super Nintendo is better than Sega Genesis and stuff like that.
And the Army guys, the guys that are in camouflage fatigues look like Buster Bluth when he's got a half day from Army. They're very costume looking.
Yeah, the military guys, they're kind of all over the place. There's the ones that you mentioned, which are just look like guys that have no business being in the military, and they're just like playing dress up. But then the rest are, I feel like there's like 7 or 8 bald guys with goatees that are just absolutely massive, like bodybuilders, and they all look exactly the same, to the point where I was like, is this one guy playing 4 different characters in this movie? And it's like, no, they're actually just different people, but they're all like bald, goateed, tanned, and just enormous. And so they all kind of like just blend together.
Yeah, they don't like. We'll meet the general shortly, but he doesn't really strike me like as someone who would have made it that far in his military career just yet. He seems a little bit too young, and I don't know, kind of a bullet-headed fella. He's the writer and the director of the movie, and he's an important character, but it was, I don't know, there's some of the casting choices are interesting. But there's one other person that's in this facility that we're surprised to see. We have Creighton Duke making his return appearance to the Friday the 13th series, and this is like his origin story in some ways. But I can't wait to hear your thoughts.
Well, this is like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 minutes into the movie, and typically when you and I are watching something, we like to remark out loud about funny things that we see, stupid things that we're seeing. But because we knew that we were going to jump on Mike right after watching this, both of us restrained from saying anything. And we were just like, it was so hard to like bottle this stuff in. And so when this character was introduced and we quickly learned that it was young Creighton Duke, I wanted to react so bad, because like anyone who's listened to our Jason Goes to Hell season knows that, one, we don't like that movie at all, but also that character is just fucking ridiculous. And I really didn't need to see his origin story.
And what's weird is that he's described in Jason Goes to Hell as a bounty hunter. He's not hunting Jason down because of any pre-existing relationship that we're told about. There is one line where he says, like, remember me, but it's not clear what that's referring to. But he's hunted down other serial killers. And so in this movie, he's like a molecular biologist and parapsychologist. He's like important in the science field, and he's helping the Crystal Lake Research Facility generate these magic mushrooms that will unlock Tina's powers to a greater degree or something. So it just doesn't line up with my impression of Creighton Duke. Not to mention that he's still dressing like a cowboy.
he's wearing the exact same outfit.
He's wearing the exact same outfit for the entire length of this movie, which actually spans, I think, several weeks, if not longer.
Yeah, I have no idea, because it all takes place within white rooms that we virtually never leave. But, yeah, so I wasn't thrilled to see Creighton Duke, especially with the added layers of complexity to his character. It's just like, it doesn't make it any better. And, you know, whatever, he's in this movie for the long run, so we just kind of had to run with it. But that was definitely the first moment where I was like, practically jumping out of my seat, because I'm like, I want to say something so bad, but I need to hold back.
Yeah, I mean, that was the moment where I started realizing that clearly this fan film was a passion project for the guy who made it, and this was his chance to throw in everything that he loved or always thought was cool from various Friday the 13th movies. So he's throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall, because as far as he knew, this was going to be his only shot at making one. So, I mean, I give him credit, but it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, there was one character trait that they threw in for Creighton Duke that I don't think was executed very well, but I kind of liked it. And it's this like quick scene where he's calling his wife, we're led to believe,
right?
And that he hasn't been home in a long time, and he's apologizing because it's still going to be another couple of months before he comes home. And he asks about his young son, I believe.
Right.
So I kind of liked the dynamic that he's this like workaholic guy. Like, I never really cared whether Creighton Duke was married or had children, but when you throw in the fact that he is and does, then suddenly it's like, okay, this guy's consumed with his work, and there's people that are suffering because of it. And, you know, it's a quick little scene, and like I said, it wasn't executed very well. The conversation was a little stilted, but it was like, all right, like that's kind of cool.
It added a layer of characters.
Yeah, he's leaving something at home.
Yeah, it made me laugh because he calls his wife, and then they exchange like 5 sentences, and he says, well, I got to go to this meeting, so I'll talk to you later. And I mean, like, you called me. So don't call me if you have to go somewhere in 2 minutes.
There was something sitting on Creighton Duke's desk. It was like a box of hot dogs going into a donut or something, like the illustration on the box, which is, it goes back to what he said in Jason Goes to Hell, where he's like, you know, Jason's nothing but a little girl in a pink dress,
right,
you know, with a hot dog going through a donut, or like something.
The word association game.
Yeah,
that
the jumble game.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
So then, I mean, there's a colonel who is sort of in charge of the day-to-day operations of this Crystal Lake Research Facility, and he's giving a briefing when the important red Commissioner Gordon phone on the folding table next to him rings, which he answers, and it turns out it's this mysterious general who is the head of the project. And you know, we can sort of hear the guy over the phone like talking loudly, and it sounds like maybe he's dressing down the colonel or something, but then he instructs the colonel to hand the phone over to Tina, who said, you know, who is this? And it's the general, and he says he's, you know, that he's there. He's shown up, sort of like the Emperor inspecting the second Death Star. And then we see him march by the window of this little, you know, meeting room. So where the hell was he calling from?
Right.
It was very strange.
Yeah, it was a little weird. They mentioned something about, this is the other project. First it was Project Gravity, and now it's Project Manifest. And Project Manifest seems to be like the big plans that they have for Tina and the serum that Creighton Duke has developed. and we don't really know what the plan is, but we also learn that there's another girl that has shown up at the facility with Tina powers, and but this one has dark hair. So
right, yeah. So the general has arrived with his crack team of super commandos, and they are wheeling this young girl whose name is Rose down the hallway. So it's another person with telekinetic / telepathic powers, and this is really going to ramp things up at the Clerf.
Did you catch the name or what the acronym meant? Because it was like FAAST, like fast, and all I was able to jot down was like something strike team. So I'm wondering it was like fucking awesome assault strike team or something.
They rattle it off at one point, and I didn't quite catch what they said because it went by so quickly.
Yeah, like I felt like it was supposed to be a joke, and I didn't get it, or I just didn't pick it up fast enough.
It wasn't quite as hilarious as like fucking awesome whatever, but it was along those lines.
Yeah, like it would have been different if like the acronym was like fart or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, it just they're the little patches on their fatigues say FAAST.
And as we're watching this, we're introduced to this Rose character, and I'm thinking she looks kind of familiar. And in fact, she was Tommy Jarvis's daughter in Vengeance.
I was wondering the same exact thing. Yes, I forgot to look it up, but it wasn't until she absolutely looked familiar the whole time, but it wasn't until the end that I started to wonder. I was like, oh, is that the girl from the Vengeance movie? And I just forgot to look it up, so I'm glad you did.
That's what I was discovering over by the sink. At the sink.
Gotcha. Okay. So that was not what I was. I have another discovery later on, but that's not the first time that we've seen an actor from one of these fan films show up in another fan film. Like we had the dude who plays the jock in the Letterman jacket from the video game,
right,
that's shown up in a couple. I'm drawing a blank. I feel like there may have been another one, but that's funny.
Yeah. But I'm a little bit fuzzy on what the general's plan for this research facility is, because they've also, Tina comes to find out that not only are they imprisoning these two powerful psychic people, they've also recovered a lot of Jason's gear, including the mask that had been cracked in half. It's been repaired, and they've collected it. So I think the intent is to try to use Tina and Rose to somehow bring Jason back, and then they want to use his body. They'll subdue him or capture him or whatever, and try to unravel his regenerative healing abilities so that they can apply them in military situations. But then at the same time, it seems like the general also wants to learn how to replicate Tina's psychic powers on a grand scale so that they can employ these telekinetic people as soldiers or assassins. So I'm not clear exactly what his plan is here and why Jason needs to be involved.
Whatever the plan is, I think it definitely entails this mystery serum that Duke has created. The way I interpreted it is like Tina's holding back her powers, and they're trying to tap into them to get to her full potential. And I think this serum kind of forces her to do that. It's like Bruce Banner turning into the Incredible Hulk or something. Like he's holding back to the point where he just can't anymore. Then he reaches this pinnacle of rage, and I feel like that's what they're trying to get Tina to do. And then when she does that, there's some kind of signal that she's going to send out that's going to awaken Jason and bring him back. And later on, that's exactly what happens. Mm-hmm. But it's I don't know how they. I'm really confused by how any of the people in this research facility know anything about Jason, because there's been nothing in the movies leading up to this where there's been a lot of public exposure to who Jason is and what he's capable of. And even if it's just Tina coming back and telling the story of what happened to her during the events of New Blood, they treat her like a crazy person. So why would they even believe her?
Yeah, right.
And so they're like, they're somehow convinced that there's this guy named Jason Voorhees out there that has these regenerative powers, and they're going to tap into it somehow. So I don't know how they know this, or why they're so convinced that that's the truth. But it just seems like they're just going to tap into the rage of Tina and get Jason to come back. And we'll get into this a little bit more later, but I don't know how Rose, this other girl, plays into it. It's a little strange.
Tina is introduced one by one to the Fox Force 5 team of crack commandos, each of whom has, a specialty. There's one guy whose name is Cutter, and he's obviously the knife guy, and another person is really strong, and one other guy is like really ballsy and will do anything or, take any chance necessary. And then there's like a girl, and it's just like, it's this, we're setting up this team of awesome commandos so that Jason can knock them down later.
It cracked me up when they got to the girl, like, because they were going down the line of everyone and explaining what their quality or traits were, and they got to the girl, and I was like, oh, I wonder what hers is going to be. And her contribution to the team is that she's the glue of the team.
She brings the sandwiches.
Yeah, like it's like, when you're at work in the office and like, oh, she's the reliable one that takes really good notes in the meetings.
Tina and Rose form a little bit of a bond over the coming weeks, to the point where they even refer to each other as sisters, even though they've only just met for the first time. But I guess their shared experiences with dealing with their psychic abilities, whatnot, have helped them form a little bond. And we learned that Rose, in a dream state of fit of rage, has accidentally murdered her parents, and in such a graphic way that people cannot even watch the security camera footage that her parents had installed in the house. Caught this terrible event, and we don't get to see it either. We just see people reacting to how horrible it was. So she's undergone some trauma, and it seems like she's even blocking her understanding of, like, she doesn't know that she's responsible for her parents' death. But Tina takes her under her wing, and they share a bond playing silly board games like Operation and talking about Nintendo and Sonic the Hedgehog. And it's just another example of the director throwing in everything that he loved from his youth, I'm guessing.
Well, there's some weird set design choices too. Like for Rose, I kind of get it, but like with Rose, everything is red. Like her sheets are red, her pillowcases are red, her blanket's red. She has a red streak of hair. Her eyes even glow red when she gets to a certain level of powers. But then with Tina, everything's pink. Like pillowcases, sheets, blankets. She has a lamp that's pink. Her like pencil case is pink, and it's like, what a weird mental health facility where they're like accommodating. Like I don't know if they like categorize their patients by certain levels, where like, well, she's a pink and she's a red because she's more dangerous, and this guy over here, he's a baby blue because he's a little bit of a pussy. And
I also thought it was weird that the nameplate outside Tina's door is Shepherd, and the nameplate outside Rose's door is Rose. So I mean,
I wondered if that was intentional, because I feel like they made a mention to Rose's parents, but they didn't get into specifics. And in fact, they even like backtracked when someone wanted to know more about the parents, and they're like,
they're unidentified,
right? Like, where we can't tell you who they are right now, or something like that. And so that's why I was like, well,
they want to keep her anonymous,
right? Or is there like some weird connection that we're going to learn about in another movie that I don't know if it exists or not? But it was just kind of strange how they were setting her up.
But Tina's getting increasingly uncomfortable with the general's plan, and it seems like even the doctor that she was friendly with is now kind of an antagonist, because he's, clearly the focus is being shifted to Rose, but they're mistreating her by hooking her up to these, machines and injecting her with the serum. And there's even an instance where she's taken into a room with the door shut and apparently undergoes like another psychic trauma event and explodes all of the doctors that are in the room. She comes out completely covered in their blood, and there's only one guy who survived, and he says, oh, she's evil, she's pure evil. So whenever she's pushed too far, she'll clearly go balls out apeshit with her TK.
Well, I can't remember if it was like right before that slaughter scene or right after, but she doesn't she throw like a glass across the room and hits the
yes.
general in the face, which we think is just an excuse because like the actor was like, I want to wear an eye patch, but we need to figure out why I'm wearing an eye patch. So
that's right. Tina and Rose are playing a board game in the rec room, and the general and this military police guy come in. They're not even really bothering the girls, but the girls are like, I wish they would just leave us alone and go away. And then they start this like little kind of argument, and the military police officer is kind of, telling Rose like, I'm not afraid of you. Go ahead and try it. I know you have your freaky powers. Try it. And so then this pint glass goes flying and hits the general on the in the face, and apparently it knocks his eye out or something, because in the very next scene he's wearing this eye patch that he had it in his desk hoping he might need it someday or something.
Right, he just had one handy. Like, who has an eye patch just lying around?
It should be a bandage or something.
Yeah.
But now the general is even more evil and sinister looking because he's got an eye patch.
Well, the first thing that reminded me of is when the remake of the Battlestar Galactica series came out. I was a little bit late to the game, and so my wife and I were on, I think, season 2, but we were watching it on DVD. But season 3 was airing concurrently on the Sci-Fi Channel, and we were just going to wait for that season to end, or wait until we finished season 2 before we got to season 3. And I was just channel surfing one day and just happened to go by the Sci-Fi Channel and was on it for like 1 second, and there's this image of Colonel Ty with an eye patch, and I'm like, fuck, like, why does he have an eye patch? Like, now I know there's going to come a point where he's going to lose an eye, and I don't know what happened. And so it just bugged me, because it was like one of these like seeds that was planted where I'm like, all right, he's going to lose an eye at some point. Is it going to be this episode? Is this episode? But it was like,
the eyeball episode.
Right.
Yeah.
I did such a good job of like avoiding spoilers, but just like 1 second of channel surfing, and I saw that.
Things have escalated to a point where Creighton Duke is apparently friendly with the janitor, who seems like a kind-hearted man. Everyone has a nice word for everyone, and he's becoming uncomfortable with what he sees going on and the mistreatment of these two young women, and he's trying to convince Creighton Duke to intervene and maybe try and help Tina escape and get back to her life. And at first, Creighton Duke is resistant, and he's not going to go along with it. But then he has a change of heart, and he does try to break Tina out. But he's discovered the general was suspicious of Creighton Duke all along, and the plan is foiled. And Creighton Duke is imprisoned in like an interrogation room or something, and then Tina is led away to a large examination room where Rose is already tied up to a chair, cuffed to a chair, and they're gonna kick this Operation Manifest into high gear and really start stressing the women out to exploit their powers.
And this is when we get, really, I think, the only shot that doesn't take place in a white room, which is like this really fast, like 3-second cutaway to like an underwater shot of Jason lurching to life and then like stepping out of the lake. And then 10 seconds later, we find him in the building itself. So, like, again, why are you building this research facility on the campground?
Right.
And why does Jason, I mean, I guess Jason knows to go there because he's gotten this like
the homing
signal
beacon
from Tina, but
so yeah, I mean, he begins his assault, murdering the guards that are on watch detail, and then it seems like the rec room for the Fox Force 5 is right by the front door of the Clurf, because he's there, and they're lounging around having a good time. They've just completed a poker game where the woman has lost and had to take a shot of, I think, whiskey.
Vodka.
It was vodka? Oh, same thing. Take a shot of vodka, but also swallow one bullet from her teammate. And so she's experiencing some stomach pains as this travels through her gastrointestinal system. But they're all lounging around having a good time, and then Jason barges in the door.
By the way, I'm also hoping that the mics are picking up the Leatherface action going on behind me in the woods with like some maniac with a chainsaw.
Oh my God, he's coming this way!
Right. So if it gets louder and louder, and then suddenly the conversation stops, you know what happened. But So a couple things I wanted to point out here is I think Jason looks pretty cool. It's a fairly decent recreation of what we saw in Part 7. A little bit more rubbery, and it doesn't like a lot of the things kind of seem like the rib cage seems like they're protruding a little bit too far out of his chest. But overall, I thought he looked pretty decent.
I agree. His hands have, like, the bones are sticking out, but it's clearly just plastic glued on these gloves, so that wasn't super convincing. But otherwise, I agree. It was a decent replica of the Part 7 design.
One observation I had from this scene is that this movie is guilty of doing something that a lot of movies and TV shows do that are very, like, era specific, where they just, like, really lean into the fact, like, hey, don't forget this is taking place in 1989, and so there's references to, like, Garbage Pail Kids and what else were they were talking? I don't know. There's just a bunch of, like, all these references. Like, I get it, we're in the 1980s, but then Jason walking down the hall, and because it's a military institution, there's a portrait of Ronald Reagan on the wall. But this is July '89, and Reagan wasn't president in July of '89.
Right.
And so it's like they either have been really lazy, or maybe they're just, like, so, busy taking care of Tina and Rose that they haven't had a chance to switch to George Bush yet. But it's like you spend all this attention to detail trying to get us to convince us that it's taking place in a specific time frame, and it's like, well, you got the wrong president.
Well, they also said that Creighton Duke went to Johns Hopkins University, and that's not the name of the university.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I also laughed that in the this badass military squad, they have a First Blood poster hanging on the wall, which, okay, they like Rambo because it's a military movie, but then they also have a Batman poster that would have just come out like a month earlier. So these are also, like, comic book nerds, even though they're this badass kill squad. It was just it goes a little overboard with the timeline establishment. We get some pretty nice Jason kills. He starts off with kind of the reckless, ballsy guy, and shoves a knife up through his chin. The kind of strong black man is given a pretty harsh beatdown, and he even gets carved up, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
And then the Cutter, the knife-throwing guy, gets in some good shots with his knives, but then he's taken care of. There's one other guy who managed to shoot Jason's kneecaps, but that doesn't stop Jason, and he gets killed. But then the girl, Jason has this wall of Jason's weapons at his disposal, sort of like in Pulp Fiction. And you think he's going to go for the machete, but he gets this weed whacker out. And we get a pretty good... If the weed whacker death in Part 7 was disappointing, this kind of makes up for it.
Right.
She's hacked in half with this thing. And the contents of her body cavity spill out onto the floor, including the little bullet that she had swallowed,
which was a very nice attention to detail.
Yeah, I thought that was cute.
Yeah,
that was a nice
chuckled.
payoff.
Yeah, I definitely saw that weed whacker kill as kind of payback for the fact that scene in New Blood got edited to death from the MPAA, and so they were like, all right, well, this is what you could have gotten if it wasn't. If all the gore wasn't edited out. But yeah, when you see her intestines, like, spill on the floor, and then there's, like, this little, like, clink, and it's the bullet landing on the ground. I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool.
Jason is marching through the hallways and rooms of this facility, killing doctors and scientists. And at one point, Creighton Duke and his janitor friend are having a conversation through the glass of this interrogation room that Duke was locked in. The janitor is attempting to break the code to the door so that he can help Creighton escape. But Jason arrives, and in front of Creighton, his friend is murdered by Jason. So that's sort of the birth of his enmity with Jason Voorhees. But the death is absolutely hilarious because Jason literally pulls the guy's face off.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And then slaps it against the door.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily something that I see Jason doing, but it was hilarious and very nicely executed.
Yeah, it was like pulling off a Mission Impossible mask or something, and just, like, you see it, like, completely peel off.
He then storms into the large examination room where Tina and Rose have been, been doped up, and kills the colonel, stabbing him through the wall with a machete. he kills the scientist with like a pen in his head, and his brains shoot out, which seemed a little bit unfeasible, but okay. So the doctor is dead, and then in another move that's very un-Jason-like, he gets the general, and the general is trying to shoot Jason with his sidearm, but Rose is preventing the general from moving his arm up high enough to get off a shot. So Jason grabs the general and then pulls his other eyeball out, and throws it on the floor. I thought he was going to like turn it around and have the guy like looking at himself
Right,
through his, and then breaks his neck.
It was weird. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of liked, just because it took a good hour. I mean, I would say maybe even like 70 minutes before Jason even shows up.
Yeah.
And so like by the time he did show up and started laying waste to everyone in the office, I was just like, I'm just glad something's happening, because like before this, it was just this like psychological, mystery movie, and I'm like, I don't care about Rose, I don't care about Tina, and so like when Jason finally showed up, I'm just like, all right, yeah, here we go, let's go.
Yeah, the previous hour and change was like people having the same conversation over and over again in these nondescript rooms.
Yeah.
And it was taxing my patience a little bit, but then the payoff with Jason was worth it.
But then there's this. So like, is he in the room with Tina and Rose at this point?
Yes, and they've managed to free themselves from their shackles.
Right. And so Tina is understandably freaking out that Jason has returned. Rose doesn't necessarily know who this dude is, but knows that he's bad news. And she starts to go into Rose power mode or whatever, where her eyes start to glow red and she starts to get super angry, and I think the room goes completely dark. And then out of the shadows steps Michael Myers.
Complete with the theme from Halloween.
No, I meant the guy from Shrek.
Oh. Get in my belly.
Yeah, Halloween Michael Myers shows up, and yeah, the music starts playing, and there's not. I mean, I know why he's there. It's fan service. They're like, "Oh my God, look, it's Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees," but like, it makes no sense because we never really understand what Rose's powers are, let alone what Tina's powers are. This is the second time we're seeing her, so it's like she's conjured evil or risen the dead or something, but like, why out of everything out there was Michael Myers the one that was like picked for the lottery?
Right. So like, and what I don't understand is Michael Myers a fictional character in the Friday the 13th universe, that she saw the movie Halloween and she was trying to think of someone to come that could match Jason's, ferocity and fight him, and so she manifested this fictional character and bring him to real life? Or is Michael Myers actually in the Friday the 13th universe in Haddonfield, and she's, somehow summoned him here, or, manifested him from beyond the grave or something? I don't get at all what.
Me neither. And I wondered the same thing. Like, was it a Last Action Hero type scenario where we're in this universe where we're tapping into, like Arnold Schwarzenegger encounters death from the Seventh Seal and like things like that. But there's no explanation, and no one even in the room even acknowledges like, holy shit, it's Michael Myers. Like, it's just this dude that, is Michael Myers that just shows up and
head tilts, and
Jason,
too
many head tilts,
have a face off.
And it's kind of a lame face-off. I would think that you're going to at least do some kind of like battle royale if you're going to introduce this. Like, they did that in Freddy vs. Jason.
Right, but here's the problem. I mean, Michael Myers, he's great at killing babysitters and, local cops and stuff, but he's not like, other than being very difficult to kill, he's not like a superhuman powerhouse. And so he's not a good matchup for Jason, because Jason would kick the shit out of Michael Myers. Michael Myers is more scary from a dread standpoint, but for like physical power, Jason would pull Michael Myers' arms off.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't last very long, because it couldn't possibly last very long. And it seems like once he is distracted by Michael and they begin their little tussle, that gives Rose and Tina a chance to like banish them back to the darkness. because Michael then disappears.
Yeah, into some kind of like portal. Like, I don't know if they're going to hell or,
Right. And then but Jason returns. So like the whole Michael gambit failed because Jason is still after them. And then Tina manages to, strangle choke his head with his mask like she did in part 7. In this case, it doesn't break, but it does fly off. And then she like opens this portal to another dimension, and he starts getting sucked in, and it even has like visual effects applied to it, like it's the void is calling him back. And it sort of reminded me of the end of Prince of Darkness when they're banishing Satan's child back into the realm of the mirror. So that kind of vanquishes Jason. He's banished to some other dimension.
The only reason why I kind of chuckled at that moment is because I had just, like, within the last couple of days, finished watching all of the Halloween movies because you lent me the discs. And I hadn't seen almost all of them in probably 20 years. And so I was revisiting that. And so Michael Myers was definitely, like, fresh in my head. And then he shows up, and it was a little confusing for me. Like, wait, what's going on here? Because I was like, that was never something that I've ever considered of all the matchups. We've heard of Freddy versus Jason, obviously, and then there was even the rumors about Ash from Evil Dead. But, like, I don't know, I just never once thought, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees battled? So when he showed up, it was, and they didn't explain it, I was just like, well, okay, I guess it's just a moment for people to, like, stand up and be like, oh shit.
Exactly, right. Yeah. But that's the end of the Crystal Lake Research Facility, the CLRF, because we flash back to present day Tina, Lar Park Lincoln, and
well, Jason kills Rose.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, I don't remember how, but he kills her before we flash back to grown up Tina.
Okay, so before he's banished into the portal, he manages to kill Rose.
Yeah, somehow, yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, she'll be missed.
Yeah.
So then we flash back, and it's Lar Park Lincoln, and she's in the Hodder mental health facility. Little nod to Kane. And, it seems like her run of bad luck with orderlies and medical personnel continues, because the orderlies are giving her a hard time, and she's trying to finish her crossword puzzle, and kind of she's still hearing the Dr. Cruz manifestation in her head, but she starts getting into an argument with the orderly, and she manages to summon Jason again. So he remanifests in her locked room of this different medical facility, and it's just insane. Like,
but he's like, as far as I can tell, he's physically manifesting.
Yes,
it's not like a vision where she's freaking out. Like, he is in the room.
He is absolutely in the room.
And so then it's like what are her powers?
Yeah.
And like that, we never saw this. Like, the reason why Jason was risen from the dead the first time in the New Blood was because she detected a life source in the lake, which she presumed was her father,
right?
And inadvertently raised Jason from the dead. But, like, she wasn't teleporting him into rooms and spaces, and
right.
And this is 30 years later. Don't forget,
right?
Like, this is present day Tina. And so why is Jason looking exactly the same from part 7 and showing up in the room? And, when it first happened, I just assumed that it was a vision and she was just having like a psychotic break or something. But he's in the room.
He's in the room, and he kills the orderly. But that's not the only familiar face who arrives out of nowhere, because after all this time, Nick has managed to figure out where Tina is, and Kevin Speartess himself shows up complete with denim jeans and jacket to rescue her from this mental health facility.
Again, 30 years after the events
Right.
of New Blood. So, like, and we know that this research facility is close to Camp Crystal Lake because Jason showed up within 5 minutes of being risen from the dead. And it's called Camp Crystal Lake Research Facility, so it's right there. So it's like, what has Nick been doing? He's like, he frantically runs into the room like, oh, I finally found you. Like, has he been running around like that for 30 years? And he's like,
Wearing the
I've
same
been
clothes.
searching every single room in every single building in every single county, and I finally found you.
And there was a moment that I thought was cute. I forget exactly what happens to Jason here. I think she banishes him again. Maybe that's the portal I'm thinking.
Yeah,
of.
that is the portal. Yeah, he fizzles into like sparks.
Yeah. Okay, so then we see the visual effects of Jason being dispersed back into the netherworld, and then Nick and Tina share a very passionate and tender kiss, which is funny because Part 7 notoriously fans complained that they didn't have a lot of chemistry. Partially because Kevin Spirtus is a gay man and was not, but he was a decent enough actor that I thought he did fine. But they also apparently didn't get along super great.
Yeah.
And they've since mended their fences. And so this was just sort of like a nice payoff to a version of the relationship that we didn't get when we saw Part 7.
Yeah. And that's pretty much where the movie ends. So there's a lot of like unanswered questions, and I think it convolutes Tina's story and Tina's powers to the point where they shouldn't have done it. Like the less we know about what Tina can do and how she does it, the better. And the less we see her do it, I think the more interesting it is. But when they're spending this entire movie trying to weaponize her, in the flashback scenes that were taking place like a year after New Blood, but then she's still there 30 years later, and it's like, why is she still there?
Right.
Like, it seems like everyone that was trying to manipulate her was killed in those flashback scenes, and so like, who is still around that feels that it's important that she has to remain institutionalized?
We do get one after the end titles and credits. There is a little stinger, a little post-credits stinger of Jason apparently in hell. This is where he was sent through Tina's portal to hell because he's got flames coming out of his mask's eye holes, and he's holding this large pitchfork trident thing. So it seems like Jason may be the king of hell, and it says, to be continued. So we will likely see more of this the story.
It also looked like he had claw marks across his mask, which, was probably supposed to be Freddy that was down there with him.
Right.
But I don't know if there's a sequel to this or if it's already out or if it's coming out. But yeah, it was certainly setting something much bigger up. And frankly, I'm a little bit more interested in that idea because there's like, at least it's focused on Jason. But
yeah, I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah, this was a little bit of a grind to get through for me. I think had you and I been able to kind of like joke around while watching it, I probably would have enjoyed it more. But because we kind of had to sit on our hands and zip our mouth and so we can save it for the podcast, I had a real struggle getting through this, especially like that first hour that I mentioned where it's just Tina and Rose and doctors and experiments, and it doesn't really know where we're going. And then there's all the Creighton Duke bullshit. But once Jason showed up, I was like, okay, it like picked up for me, and I got into it a little bit more. But yeah, it was a little bit of a slog for me.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, it certainly was longer than it needed to be, but it did have some moments that I kind of perked up for. And it went in some batshit crazy directions, some of which, are fun and some of which I question. But yeah, it was, it definitely would have been more fun if we could have been commenting to each other our thoughts in the moment.
So for the next movie we're going to talk about in the next episode, we're going to break our protocol a little bit. We've been going through these in release order just to kind of, not prioritize these in any way, but because we had so many questions after watching Here Comes the Night Part 2, which was the previous episode, we're going to jump ahead and we're going to watch Part 3, which we think and hope is the conclusion to that story, so we can kind of hopefully get some answers and come to a conclusion for something that, it's still fresh in our minds, and we can remember, what happened in the first and second ones, and kind of be like, all right, let's wrap this up with the third one and figure out what the whole point was, and then we can discuss it. So that'll be the next one.
Well, I'm going to go throw another log on the fire, so until next time, you're all doomed.
You are all doomed.